This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil fell below $100 per barrel on Wednesday after U.S. President Donald Trump said he had agreed to a two-week ceasefire with Iran, subject to the immediate and safe reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Brent futures fell $15.02, or 13.8%, to $94.25 a barrel at 08:05 GMT, while WTI slid $17.43, or 15.4%, to $95.52 a barrel. Trump's turnaround came shortly before his deadline for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil transits, or face widespread attacks on its civilian infrastructure.
Some Chinese independent refiners, armed with fresh import quotas from Beijing, have begun seeking prompt cargoes of Iranian crude after oil prices slumped on Wednesday, three trade sources said. Brent crude futures dropped below $100 per barrel on Wednesday to the lowest since March 11, after U.S. President Donald Trump said he had agreed to a two-week ceasefire with Iran that was subject to the immediate and safe reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The Chinese refiners, known as teapots, had largely stayed on the sidelines since the U.S.-Iran conflict broke out in late February, causing global oil prices to surge, while Washington temporarily waived sanctions on Russian, Iranian crude at sea, raising discounts for these cargoes.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
U.S. and European energy stocks slid on Wednesday as oil prices tumbled after a two-week Middle East ceasefire raised hopes for a resumption of oil and gas supply through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday agreed to the ceasefire less than 2 hours before his deadline for Iran to reopen the strait or face devastating attacks on its civilian infrastructure. The ceasefire follows a 6-week conflict that drove oil prices sharply higher, forcing governments and companies to scramble for cover against a sudden energy shock.
The energy crisis caused by the Iran conflict will not be short-lived, an EU Commission spokesperson said on Wednesday. EU Commission spokesperson Anna-Kaisa Itkinen told reporters that around 8.5% of the bloc's LNG, 7% of its oil and 40% of its jet fuel and diesel travels through the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has mostly blocked access to during the war. What we can already foresee is that this crisis will not be short-lived, she said. It's a very, very important choke point, obviously. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Gold rose to a near 3-week high on Wednesday as oil prices and the dollar fell sharply after the U.S. and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire as talks began on a permanent end to the war. Spot gold was up 1.7% at $4,783.78 per ounce, as of 11:23 GMT. Earlier in the session, bullion rose more than 3% to its highest level since March 19. U.S. gold futures for June delivery gained 2.7% to $4,812.60. The United States and Iran have agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, subject to Iran's agreement to pause its blockade of oil and gas supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, Trump said.
India's Federal Steel Ministry has postponed a global steel conference scheduled for April 16 to 17 in New Delhi, citing disruption to international participation due to the Middle East crisis, the ministry said. In view of the evolving global situation, including the West Asia crisis, a number of participating delegates, speakers, exhibitors and other stakeholders are facing considerable inconvenience and hardship in relation to travel, logistics, scheduling and associated arrangements, a Ministry of Steel statement said on Wednesday. The Middle East conflict began on February 28 when the US and Israel launched attacks on Iran. Tehran has since closed the Strait of Hormuz and struck sites in other countries in the region.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
India on Wednesday raised its nutrient-based subsidy for summer-sown crops by 11.6% from a year earlier to shield farmers from rising global fertiliser prices following the US-Israeli war with Iran. The cabinet approved a nutrient-based subsidy scheme worth 415.34 billion rupees, $4.50 billion, for the summer crop season, Information Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw said. The government aims to ensure that farmers continue to get a 50-kilogram bag of diammonium phosphate at the current price of 1,350 rupees despite the rally in global prices, Vaishnaw said.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.